Now we go live to London now, where we're joined via Skype by the editor-in-chief of the International Interest, Sami Hamdi. Sami, thanks very much indeed for joining us. So there are concerns about the situation in Morocco and Western Sahara. It looks as if there's been military operations taking place at a very important border point, which is the route of a busy road. And I just wonder what has caused this escalation and this military intervention, given that these two were supposed to be in a ceasefire.
There are conflicting narratives over what's been going on. So the Moroccans are saying that there was a protest taking place in the Western Sahara that had entered the buffer zone, and that Morocco had dispatched troops and some tanks to the border with the buffer zone and had shot some warning shots in order to get the protesters to vacate the road and to open up that passage once more. The Polisario, who are the group that are trying to pursue independence for the Western Sahara, claim that the Moroccans embarked on an act of aggression and that their bid to get the protesters to disperse and to open the road again was an act of war, and therefore it's time to go back to fighting the Moroccans. It's important to highlight that the Western Sahara remains a very controversial issue. Morocco believes that the Western Sahara belongs to it. It's its territory. It already controls more than 75% of the territory. The UN has tried on a number of occasions to try to bring some sort of settlement between the conflicting parties. But it's also important to highlight that not all of the regional powers recognize Morocco's bid for the Western Sahara. You have Algeria, which is heavily sympathetic to the Polisario, heavily sympathetic to the Western Sahara for its own reasons. It believes that Morocco is on a rabid land grab. But the reality is that tensions have been simmering. Tensions have been there for some time. Even though we call it a ceasefire and that the ceasefire has been there for a number of years, the reality is that this ceasefire has been becoming increasingly tenuous as more and more diplomatic initiatives have been failing.
So what are the chances of an escalation? Because the language being used is quite tough and warlike, but none of them really can afford to engage in a conflict in this region.
It depends. I think Morocco will be gauging the international mood, and it will be gauging the regional mood. I think Morocco has always been keen on taking the Western Sahara once more. Morocco managed to secure recognition once upon a time from the United Nations in the form of a prospective referendum that was supposed to take place in the Western Sahara. But Morocco, it became overexcited, and it was accused of sending in Moroccans to Western Sahara to pretend to be Western Saharan citizens, so that they could increase the quota that would vote for joining Morocco as opposed to independence. So Morocco has always felt that international law is on its side, that the initiatives have always been in its favor, but that there have been other regional dynamics, whether it's the involvement of Algeria or the like, that have scuppered its bid to take the Western Sahara. Now, when you're looking at the current global climate, you see Azerbaijan storming into Nagorno-Karabakh and managing to retake a lot of its territory from the Armenians. When you see the impunity with which now groups are going about settling their scores militarily, one would suggest, in fact, that Morocco now is going through a phase by which, let's see what the international reaction will be. Let's gauge to what extent they will get involved to try to rescue the Polisario. And if conditions are conducive, why not begin a military campaign to seize the rest of the 25%?
So it seems as if perhaps there's fatigue setting in with countries supporting the Polisario Front and the Western Sahara story. We've seen the African Union re-embrace Morocco. We've seen countries setting up embassies in, is it Lahoun? And I just wonder if this means that the idea of a Western Sahara independent state perhaps is becoming less and less likely with the passage of time.
I think the biggest issue with the Western Sahara is that when you speak with African diplomats privately, behind closed doors, they will all agree that the idea of a country being established with a population of 300,000 is, by African standards, quite something that would not usually be accepted. and that the reason why Western Sahara has been able to survive so far is quite simply because Morocco's poor relations with Algeria and the inability of Morocco to reconcile with Algeria's grievances. And for those perhaps who are unaware, when in 1962, when Algeria secured its independence, Morocco sought to expand its territory by taking parts of the Western Sahara and also taking parts of Algeria. And Algeria believed that Morocco, therefore, from henceforth, Morocco could not be trusted. And Algeria became a very key supporter of the Polisario and of the Western Sahara. So I think the African Union is getting involved, but on the basis that guys find a solution. We're not really fussed whether the Western Sahara has independence or not, but you guys need to come to some sort of arrangement. Mauritania has withdrawn its previous claim to the Western Sahara. It says, I want nothing to do with it. You guys can fight about it between yourselves. But I do think that when it comes to the issue of the Western Sahara, I think the matter is more one of Algeria, Morocco, as opposed to a wider international issue. Because I do believe that but for Algerian support and but for Algerian antagonism to Morocco, which Algeria has its own reasons for. I'm not saying that it's doing it for its own interest. It has its own reasons to distrust Morocco. But the reality is that this is the crux of the Western Sahara. And the Polisario know that in different circumstances, the international community and international law would be very loath to recognize their bid for independence and would prefer that they join Morocco.
Do the Polisario Front have the military capability to engage?
That's a very good question, and I think the problem with insurgencies is that it's very difficult to fight guerrilla groups. It's very difficult to fight small forces that perhaps enjoy international sympathy on the basis that they're the underdog fighting the big bad nations that are established. I do think the Polisario have enough military capability to cause a headache for Morocco. I think they will be able to draw on enough international support to put Morocco in a very difficult situation. And that's why I think Morocco is in a process of gauging what the international response might be. I do think that the Polisario have been perhaps a bit too eager in going back to war, and that may be because when a population lives in peace for a long time, they become less attuned to the ideas of war and perhaps more inclined for greater unity in terms of politics and in terms of economics. And moreover, Moroccan soft power as well in opening that road, in ensuring that trade, in ensuring that relation with the Western Sahara has put Morocco on a stronger footing than the Polisario. So I think the Polisario do have the military means to cause a headache, but I do not think that the international environment is conducive for Morocco to launch a full-fledged military offensive, even though that if you ask a Moroccan privately, not on public television, what is their preferred option, they would prefer a military campaign to seize the Western Sahara and end the issue once and for all.